Let's finish with a few more of the practical questions that people
Okay.
probably have. So you mentioned your personal strategy is about 10 grams a day. I'm
Mhm.
assuming, based off reading your studies and also my conversation with Eric Rawson, that there's no need to take any form of creatine other than creatine monohydrate.
That's correct. So every study, pretty much the safety and efficacy is based on monohydrate, and monohydrate simply means creatine linked to water. When you ingest it, it's identical to what's being synthesized in the brain or liver, and that's probably why monohydrate has such an exceptional safety profile.
And is creatine monohydrate, is that kind of dime a dozen? I know that a lot of brands now are using the branded form CreaPure, which I've
Yes.
seen has also been used in studies, and I think some of your studies.
Yep.
Is there any reason to kind of believe that that might be high quality or different to other brands that are selling creatine monohydrate that are not CreaPure?
Yeah, no, at the end of the day, the key is that it's monohydrate. And then the other thing to look for that it's been third party or independently tested for lack of purities or safety. So make sure the individual is looking for a product that has third party tested, that's independent. So when you're buying the product or whichever it is, creatine, and then of course it's monohydrate. And at the end of it, any monohydrate, if it's pure, it's going to have the same effect.
And do you have a preference for whether that is within a blend or an isolated ingredient?
Yeah, so I've seen people dry scoop. I'm like, well, creatine loves water, so put it in solution. I put 5 grams in my breakfast in the morning. I usually have Greek yogurt with protein and collagen and some berries. And then I actually drink, I put 5 grams in a water bottle and I drink that during my workout. I find it very easy and convenient. So the bioavailability will be the same dry scoop in food or in solution. It's really up to the person to maintain consistency.
Speaking about how you're consuming it or what you're consuming it with, there's been talk, I guess, for a long time that consuming your creatine with carbohydrates can be a helpful way for kind of driving that creatine into muscle cells. Is that because insulin helps with getting creatine into muscle cells, and is that also why you have it with protein?
Yeah, no, yes, for two reasons. So you're right, insulin can definitely augment creatine uptake into the cell, but the dose of insulin you need is super physiological. It's very, very high. The lucky thing and the nice thing is from a population or health perspective, protein, and i.e. whey protein, is very gluconeogenic or insulingenic, and that can actually have the same effect. Mark Tarnopolsky compared to studies showing it had the same effect. And the nice thing with protein, you get all the essential amino acids. So I prefer protein. I take in a bit of carbohydrates for glycogen resynthesis as well. But one of the best ways to increase creatine uptake is exercise. Muscle contractions will stimulate the doorways in your muscle to allow creatine in. So that's why one of the theories is to consume creatine in close proximity to exercise, either before, during, or after. It's when blood flow to your muscles is there, the transport kinetics is there. And we're looking at that in the winter term to see, does the timing really matter in those three areas? But that's a really interesting, viable way that I think can provide at least consistency, but there's some mechanisms to suggest it might be a viable way to consume it.
I think you mentioned that you split your dose
Mhm.
across the day. So what are the, if any, the advantages of splitting the dose versus just having 10 grams in one single bolus?
So the theory is that smaller, more frequent dosages may lead to an increase in absorption and retention. It's very similar to the theory with protein. Can you take 200 grams of protein in one meal? You can, but you're not going to use all that from a muscle protein perspective. So the theory here is that if you take smaller dosages, maybe you're going to absorb all of it and retain it. Less will be degraded to creatinine. So I take 2 5-gram dosages. We actually have a study plan where we're going to do 5 2-gram dosages. Does that make any difference compared to a 10-gram bolus dose, to answer that exact question? And that's going to be coming up in the new year. So could repeated smaller dosages be different than a bolus? We don't know. And I think it'd be cool that there was no difference. Then the consumer could say, I can take it however I like. I know I'm going to get the same effect.
Yeah, 5 2-gram doses a day might lead to slightly different adherence. somehow, I think.
That's exactly right. What if you forget and things like that? So I think in today's society, we're just trying to make things easy, and try to take away the pressures. And that's why I'm glad that the timing of creatine, just like the timing of protein, may be irrelevant. You can just sort of eat and enjoy life and go on with your day.
Quick one, folks. I get asked all the time about buying supplements and getting blood tests. The good news is I've created comprehensive and completely free guides for both. Simply head over to my website, theproof.com, to download them. That's theproof.com. Okay, let's get back to the episode.
If someone's going to start creatine supplementation, they have never had it, or they're starting for the first time in a long time, so we can assume that their cells are rather depleted.
Right.
Is there an advantage to doing a sort of quote unquote loading phase, a higher dose sort of period for a week or so, and then shifting to that maintenance phase versus just going straight into a 3 or 5 grams a day dose?
Yeah, the only advantage of the rapid loading phase is that it will obviously rapidly saturate the muscle, and you may get a slightly quicker response. The downfall is that's the time we see some anecdotal GI tract irritation, acute water and or weight retention. But again, the lucky thing is 3 grams a day will saturate the muscle just the same way. It'll just take a month. So it really depends. For the athletes, the World Championships coming up, if you really need a fast, rapid boost, the loading phase is probably something to consider. But for everybody else listening that says, hey, I kind of am interested in creatine for the lifelong journey, 3 grams a day from a muscle perspective will saturate your muscles, and you can take that every day. And of course, we've talked about if you want to boost that up to get maybe some bone and or brain benefits, that's very viable as well.
I've heard you say that if you're worried about water retention, dividing your dose out across the day could be a useful strategy. My question, I guess, that I have with this is earlier, I believe you kind of mentioned that it might be the swelling of the muscle and the pulling of the water into the muscle tissue that is leading to some of these beneficial changes that we're seeing from a hypertrophy or strength point of view. So could it actually be that spreading the dose out across the day, while it might lead to less water retention, is actually reducing some of the ergogenic benefits that come with creatine?
Excellent analogy. It's something I've thought of. It will accumulate or have water drag every time it's being continually taken in. But that's an excellent question. Could the bolus cause more of a tidal wave, if you will, whereas more smaller dosages cause more of a consistent trickling in effect? Does that lead to any of the differences? We just don't know, and that's something that we're going to be considering with that dosing study.
What about this idea of cycling creatine? Do we need to come off of creatine and give our body a rest, or is it something that we can just take, on an ongoing basis?
Yeah, we see no evidence in humans that you downregulate your natural endogenous synthesis with chronic creatine supplementation. We've actually given it continuously for years. So the theory is that there's no evidence to suggest you have to cycle it. There's no evidence to suggest you get greater effects by cycling it versus continuous. And that's a study that desperately needs to be done. And ironically, it's never been shown. But in theory, there's no reason that you need to cycle it. But if you say, hey, I can't afford creatine or I'm traveling, keep in mind, it stays in your muscles for at least a month. So you could cycle it indirectly and still experience benefits.
And you mentioned before that having creatine sort of right before a workout or during a workout in your water or after is a good strategy for increasing the uptake of that creatine into muscle cells. But just to be clear, people should be supplementing on both training and non-training days?
Ideally, yes, now from a whole body perspective. So there is some studies that have shown you can just take creatine on the days you work out and get muscle benefits. But I now think of, well, wait a minute, it wants to trickle into other areas. And I think from a consistency perspective, it may be best to take it every day.
And how quickly would someone experience benefits, and what might they notice in order to know that it's working and they're actually a responder?
Yeah, it might come down to the dosing protocol. I think the loading phase, you could experience results maybe in as little as a few weeks, probably from a strength or a exercise capacity perspective. But if you start with the lowest dose, it'll probably take you more time, say maybe a month, to notice I could get a few more repetitions, or my close is getting a bit tighter, or I can run faster, recover. So it probably comes down to the dosing paradigm or protocol you're doing.
And are there actually, I guess, quote unquote, true non-responders, a percentage of the population that literally would be wasting their money if they were taking creatine?
Yeah, we know it from a muscle perspective. Yeah, if you have a high amount already in the muscle. So on average, the average human can store about 160 millimoles, or just think 160 grams of creatine. Well, we can only store a small amount. We start out about 80 to 120. So there are some people who can be already at the ceiling. And I would guess if you're on a carnivore diet, you're probably at the ceiling when it comes to muscle and potentially bone and brain. If you're eating 3 steaks a day and 2 salmons, you're probably getting an adequate amount. So it might come down to your habitual diet.
Right. So if you're on a carnivore diet, you probably don't need to be thinking about creatine, but perhaps glycogen. Might want to think about
and fiber.
glycogen stores.
That's right.